Hi, my name is Solomon Brezen and welcome back to this YouTube channel. Today I want to talk a lot about meditation and specifically my experience at a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which was a Vipassana approach back in December 2019. Now you may have heard me talk with different guests on my podcast or in my own solo episodes about meditation, or maybe even read a little bit of something I wrote like on a blog post. But like I said, I want this one to be really aimed at that approach, perhaps to help you learn more about the Vipassana approach, or even deepen and advance your own understanding if you're at a point where you feel you're ready to step into that space and give that experience a try. In this video, we're going to talk about the technique, what went on throughout the 10 days, the daily schedule, and my review of it all. Being said, let's dive into the technique and the approach for the 10 days. So you may have some familiarity with either a mantra, a vision or an image, or even the breath. These are all focal points, places that when your mind wanders, when your attention wants to go and think about something that may happen in the future or something that happened in the past, you want to be able to bring your awareness, your attention to some focal point. That's where transcendental meditation has its mantra, or if you do like a guided visualization, you're remaining on target with that visualization. And this approach, the focal point was the breath, especially for the first 3 days. And the technique had these two main components: awareness and equanimity. The awareness, of course, is to notice the breath or the sensations on the body, and when your mind may wander, and it will, of course, the first few days because you're breaking out of your normal routine of doing things. The second key component is equanimity or objectivity. When your mind wanders to the future or to the past and you're noticing different sensations on the body or the breath, you're not judging it. You're simply becoming aware of it as it is. Now, I'll dive into how this really helps the body and helps the mind as a whole. But first, I really want to dive into the structure of the 10 days. So it was really laid out between like 4:30 a.m. until about 9 p.m., where from 4:30 to 6:30, you would meditate. From 6:30 to 8, there would be like a break and breakfast. Then 8 to 9, you'd meditate. 9 to 10, you'd meditate. There would be about a break every hour. So besides the 4:30 to 6:30 in the morning, although some days I know some people may have slept in, or myself, maybe I got there closer to 5, each meditation was about an hour of length. Even though they would be consecutive, there would be time to get up and go to the restroom. And it went on through, then we would have like a 2-hour break from 11 to 1 for lunch, and just a time to walk around the campus where it was at. Then you'd have more meditations, and by 5 o'clock there would be like an hour-long tea break, and then more meditations, the same technique until 7 to 8. There would be a discourse, which was a recording of the founder of the Vipassana retreat, S.N. Goenka, which was on YouTube. He passed away in 2013. So we would watch those recordings, and then there would be one final meditation, and you would go to bed, and that would be it again. Now, on the first 3 days, it was really to build that practice. The body and the person as a whole is now out of their normal routine. So normally when your body you're getting up and you have to attend to the demands of the day, whether it's work or feeding your body or helping your family or whatever it is, now you're in a place where from most of the day you're meditating and getting outside of that routine. So it's going to be quite unpleasant, and there's going to be a lot of resistance and tension between the mind and the body, and that's okay. That means you're doing it right. That's part of the process. But for the first 3 days, it was really building that focus and that awareness. And the first 3 days was on just the inhalation and exhalation of the breath, and just this triangular area of the nose, to keep it a nice, like, smaller area so that it's easier to have a focal point to return your attention to and build that concentration. And again, remain equanimous, because if we react to our mind wandering, meaning if I notice my mind wanders and I get angry at that, it only further distracts me from bringing my attention to the moment. So the equanimity would just be noticing it and bringing it back to the focal point without a reaction, but just an observance. Now in those first 3 days, that's pretty much all it was, just in this area. And you can imagine it probably got quite unpleasant or annoying by just having that focal point the first 3 days. But nonetheless, it helped really build that concentration. And you would notice, I noticed, at least more and more I practiced it, how much quicker I was able to notice my attention wander, think about something that I want to happen, or a fear, or something that happened in the past that would come up, and it became easier and quicker for me to notice that any of the thought, it's coming from some place that's not in this present moment. And so you would pick that up and return it to the present moment. Now in the 4th through 10th day, we transitioned to moving to our attention from the top of the head in this the soft area, and kind of scanning down throughout the body in every minute area you can, just building your attention. And like we were focusing with the breath, you're continuing with the breath and the awareness, but now also the sensation on the body, just noticing different areas on the body with your attention, kind of scanning through, and perhaps even catching or being aware of where a certain thought may arise on the body, and just scanning throughout the body, throughout the arms, all the way down to the toes, and from the toes back up. And then that's pretty much what the whole technique is. In this next part, I'll explain how that really helps you as an individual with your mind, your awareness, building different faculties of equanimity, of concentration, of being present, and how it ultimately heals the body as well, and brings previous thoughts or beliefs that came from a limited space, which means they're no longer serving you. Maybe a bad habit came from it, or a fear that's irrational. The thoughts that come from that place arise ultimately, that you can become aware of them and notice that pattern, so then you can change it. Good question now. Understanding a little bit about the technique is, well, why? Why meditate? Why do it so often? Why put yourself into a intense and turbulent experience like this just to be with yourself in a silent place? Well, to that we have to understand how the body works, and especially the brain, and what the brain looks like when it's in the present moment. One of the key parts of meditation is to build presence, to be able to be mindful. All that means is, how are you being in this present moment? Often we're thinking about something, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, that may happen in the future, or we're dwelling in something that happened in the past. So by practicing the meditation, it ultimately helps us be present. Now let's dive more into what is present, how does it really help me, and there's more to it. But ultimately, when you're present, you're functioning at your best. In a sense, you're completely connected or aligned with the source of all creation. And when you're present, your brain, the different parts of your brain, are communicating a lot more effectively. So if you're thinking about something if you're anxious or thinking about something that may happen in the future, there are certain parts of the brain that will not communicate, and the same thing with the past. And we have to look into a little bit of the physiology here, because our body is similar to an animal. If you look at an animal, and it's in a state of fight, flight, and a predator comes and puts it under threat, it turns into a survival mode. That's where our sympathetic nervous system, it turns on. Our body uses all of its resources to get into a place of safety. It's like the animal. With an animal, if the deer sees a lion chasing it, it'll use all of its resources. It puts its attention on the cause that changed its internal state, and it uses all of its available resources to get to safety. But once it gets to safety, the autonomic, it returns to this kind of rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system, and returns to homeostasis, its nice balance. Us, on the other hand, because we have such a developed forebrain, we can think about our problems and continue to ruminate in them for quite a while. So it's good on a short-term stress if we're really in a state of threat, but on a long term, it can really start to damage the body and create a newer balance, but it isn't so optimal. Given that we know now that we're also functioning and thinking most clearly in the present moment, therefore we're able to make better decisions. Our health will be better. We're not going to be anxious about what step we may need to do or what's the most important thing to do, or worried about something happened in the past because it's over and done with. We can learn from those different situations, and ultimately, with the practice of meditation, take away the emotion that's tied to it, because that's a lot that may be keeping us in the past. So like I mentioned, the animal example, it runs away to get the safety, and ultimately then returns back to rest and digest and repair. Us, let's say we have a sour experience in the past from let's say a family member, or somebody at school, or up into later adult stages at work. Something happens, somebody does something that creates animosity towards them, a feeling of anger, some kind of feeling of threat, ultimately puts the body into survival mode. Now, unlike the animal, if we're not aware and don't take things personally, then we'll continue to have that experience every time we're around that person. And that just because of the environment of being around that person, it'll remind us of that previous situation. And this can be unoptimal, because then we're continuously creating that kind of same experience that happened in the past, as opposed to learning from it, not taking things personally from whoever did something or whatever happened to us. You may have read that 95% of our daily habits are subconscious behaviors, and only 5% of what we do throughout the day on a daily basis is conscious. Now, this is where meditation comes in. In order for things to change, we have to think differently. So the meditation, especially the retreat, comes in handy because you're beginning to become conscious of what you've unconsciously been doing. And a lot of that comes from habits we created from our early development years. So if you look at it like an iceberg, there's so much below the surface, and just the top of the part is our conscious brain, and the lower part is the subconscious. But a lot of what's consciously being thought ultimately comes from these lower subconscious behaviors, and that drives the thoughts. So that creates your perception. That's why people have different perspectives and perceptions around the world, is because of the different experiences and beliefs created from those experiences growing up and conditioning into that behavior. With the meditation retreat, there's a really good analogy that was explained during one of the discourses, that there are three kinds of thoughts that arise throughout a day. You may have some that are like lines of water. They may just kind of pop in your head, but ultimately they wash away just right after you're finished. There are others that are like lines of sand, that something may trigger this reaction and it stays there a little bit longer, but by the evening the wind has pushed other sand over it and it's covered up. But then there are really deeper emotional reactions to things that are like the very root that creates our perception and experience and personality throughout the world, that are like lines in concrete. And it's really deep, and it takes a lot longer for all of that to kind of rise and ultimately shift. And so throughout the experience of the 10-day meditation and just meditation practice on its own, one becomes familiar of how they've been unconsciously uh, behaving throughout a day. And this becomes very beneficial to somebody who, let's say, continues to make a mistake or not perform their best in school, in sports, whatever the case may be. It's unconscious. It's not something that they're doing on purpose. You may see this in somebody who is a very good practice musician or practice player, but when it gets to showtime, they choke up because maybe something happened when they were developing as an early kid that ultimately kind of created such an emotional reaction to them that when they step on that stage, it reminds them of that previous experience and they unconsciously mess up that's in a familiar way. And so ultimately they're creating that same scene and experience in their life because they'll also reaffirm it. This always happens to me. This will never change. With the practice of the meditation, you begin to notice this pattern in one's life and realize that you can change it. And it all comes from the different thoughts. Ultimately, everything starts with the intellect, because also the intellect gives rise to the different emotions. So these different behaviors that came about from our development years and throughout is because we had this experience that created some kind of interchange within us, and then we created we had a thought about it and created a belief about that, and it never really went unquestioned. And I say development years because also during those early years, I think like 3 to 7 years old, our conscious brain hasn't even fully developed yet. So we're in such a subconscious state, just observing things and taking things in, that we create beliefs without question. And that can be harmful if it's a belief that doesn't serve us, or we see something that ultimately we have a limited perspective about the world. So given that, with the practice of the meditation and at this retreat, one can notice by breaking out of the routine the familiar ways they've been living life. And I like to look at this retreat kind of as like the silence between the notes, or even a piece of music for my life, because it was the first time I took a real 10-day pause from everything that I've been doing for 23 years of my life at that point, and just really gave the body a complete restoration, a complete place to rejuvenate and heal. And in that, I recognized different ways of thinking, different fears that may arise that were irrational, and ultimately drove certain thoughts or misunderstandings or beliefs about how to live life, how to experience life.